excitement for this new inaugural program, and this is called MOCA Treasures on the Road. The genesis of this program came from one of our directors, our board directors, who said after the fire on January 23rd, 2020 at our collection site, 70 Mulberry Street, we just saw this wonderful outpouring of love and interest in the collections. And we are finally in a place where we are about to bring back about 85,000 items into a temporary space at 70, that was at 70 Mulberry Street. We'll be opening that temporary space on October 16th. So in a little under a month. That will be at 3 Howard Street. So look out for that announcement. We've been very fortunate to have this time to really bring everything back together. The conservation period will probably be 6 years, but we are definitely in the process and have a good support from partners who help us in the process of bringing everything together. But we will be opening that space, and we're excited to present it to you. And that new space will be called the Mocha Workshop, and it will be led by our incredible exhibition collections team, Director Yue Ma, and again, Associate Director Kevin Chu. So thank you for all of your support, and please look out for more information on that. So the genesis of this is also the fact that there's so much interest about our artifacts, our things, but sometimes the commentary we receive is we're not quite sure what is something that we should keep and what should be something we might not necessarily keep, and what are the stories behind those objects. So this is what we hope to do in this time together, is to bring always a guest who has 1 or 2 artifacts to share, and then an expert of that time period. If you will, it's our MOCA Antiques Roadshow. And we're not going to give a price because these are things we want to keep and we don't want to sell them. So that's the genesis of this program. And we'll be doing it all around the country. And this time of Zooming was giving us an opportunity to really share some of those treasures that are out there in the Chinese American journey and story. So today I'm so excited. Don Cohn is so renowned as a textile, but he's being modest, textile expert, but also an expert of Chinese history. And when we did the prep call with Robert Forbes, you could tell how excited he was. But Don also has many, many hats, if you will. And he is a collector, he's a book dealer, he's an expert of textiles, and he's an often sought after expert in this space. So he will be moderating the call, and I will hand it over to him. And please put your questions in the Q&A, we'll bring those back. But very excited to welcome you to the first MOCA Treasures on the Road, featuring the Forbes House Museum. Thank you to Heidi and Robert Pierce Forbes, and our expert, Don Cohn.
Thank you, Nancy. Robert, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm a historian trained at Yale. I mostly do United States history between the Revolution and the Civil War. And I'm also a member of the board of the Forbes House Museum, and the son of the late founder and director of the museum, Crosby Forbes. I was there at the creation, although I was only about 7 years old, in 1965, when my father, who inherited the Forbes house in Milton, Massachusetts, from his great aunt. You can see her with the boxer on her lap. My father is to her left. He inherited it from her when she died in 1962. This house was built in 1833. It was constructed by her sons, Robert Bennett Forbes, who is all the way on the left there, and his younger brother, John Murray Forbes, in honor of their older brother, Thomas Tunno Forbes, who died in a typhoon off of Macau in the 1820s. With his share of the company's funds, they built this house for their mother. And when my father inherited it in 62, at a certain point, something clicked and he realized that his life's work was to tell the story, not so much of the Forbes family, but of the American China trade, which they were deeply engaged in. And it was already filled with many artifacts. And he was able to recruit from family members many of the other artifacts, and essentially to recreate in the house something much like what it looked like, what was there when Captain Robert Bennett Forbes lived there, and his mother. So I'll talk about these items which have a very deep meaning for me, and I'll turn it back over to Don.
We are going to discuss two items today. And though that sounds simple, and one is simply a portrait of a man, the other is a small round sphere of colored stone. And these two items that are in the Forbes family collection are just the tip of an iceberg of one of the most amazing and incidents in the history of Chinese-American relations, and also in the history of China per se. And let's go to the portrait first. The portrait is, there we go. It's the one on the lower left, Hao Qua. Could we focus on this man? Hao Qua was an, believe it or not, possibly the richest man in the world in the 1840s. He made his money from trade, from trading with the outside world in the commodities that were very popular in the 1830s: silk, tea, opium, porcelain. And I say the four of those as if they were equal. And I think to the rather immoral British who were leading the trade at that time, opium was not an issue of morality, but rather just a commodity. And the place where the Ford family comes in, Robert's great-great-great-grandfather and great-great-great-uncle, sorry.
Yeah. Great.
Huh?
Just two greats, great.
Oh, just two greats. Oh, I owe you an A, a great, or you owe me one.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were wiser about opium, realized the sensitivity and that opium created. And maybe that is one reason why the Americans have had over the years up to today a more intimate, not necessarily a happier, but a more intimate and complex relationship with China. And Robert's great-great uncle and grandfather were key actors in creating this world. Let's talk again a little bit about Hao Qua. He was a Fujianese who came to the South. He was a trader. He was appointed the leader of the Kohangs. These were 13 or about 13 designated, you could call them companies or offices, who were given a monopoly to trade with the outside world during the early 19th century. And Hao Qua also, one of the other sides of his activities with all his money is he actually gave $500,000, or is it $1 million or $500,000, to your great-great uncle to invest in the United States. What is that story?
Yeah, I had it right in front of me before, but
What, the $500,000?
Yeah, I think it actually was more than that. I think it may have been 1.5 million.
What would that be in today's terms?
Uh, about 18 times that. Um,
Wow,
so a lot of money.
a lot of money. And your great great uncle wisely invested it in railroads, of all things, and then paid the interest back to the heirs of Haokua after he died. Is there, does the Haokua have any living Sturpies?
He does, and I had the extraordinary experience. I was asked to join a Massachusetts trade delegation to Guangzhou in 2004, and it was in commemoration of the 2014. It was commemoration of the 230th anniversary of the arrival of the Empress of China, the first American merchant ship to arrive in China and to trade with them. And I mentioned at one of the luncheons that I was very interested in seeing if I could connect with any descendants of Wu Ping Qian, which is the Chinese name of Haokua. And a gentleman sitting next to me knew of such a person and connected us. We were able to meet in a few days, and that was just extraordinary. So he has many descendants in China. Most of them didn't know that he was their ancestor, didn't know anything about him until well after the Cultural Revolution. And very many of them are very prominent businessmen, scientists, engineers in China today. You just can't keep that family down, it seems.
Where do they live? Mostly in the South? Or
Mostly in the South. The gentleman who I met lived in Shenzhen, just a few miles east of Guangzhou. But they've spread out over many parts of the world. He's still trying to put together the family tree and connect with as many cousins as he can.
your Haokua, along, I believe, with your great great uncle dash father, were started a hospital. Was that actually the first Western hospital in China?
I didn't know that they had been involved in that. That's news to me. But if it's the one that I'm thinking of, that would have been unquestionably the first Western hospital in China.
I read about it, and it said, what I read said that Haokua actually died there. It was in Guangzhou, or more likely on Shamian Island.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what he's wearing now. You can see that he has a rank badge, and he's wearing court necklace, and it is rather extraordinary for a businessman in China to have such a decoration, and even to have a red ball, a red stone, a red insignia on the top of his hat. Because merchants, in the greater scheme of things, merchants were looked down upon. They were only second to the bottom in the hierarchy that started with scholars and academics and people who competed in the examination system. And here he is with a honor having been granted by the emperor for business. And the reason why he got it, I believe, is that after the Opium War, which obviously disturbed his business greatly, there was an indemnity charged to given to the British for the burning of the opium, and he paid off part of that indemnity on behalf of the Chinese Qing government to the British, and they gave him a reward for that, and therefore he was given the role or the rank of a financial commissioner. That's the same rank shared by Lin Zexu, who was the Chinese official who came from the north to actually forbid the British and the Americans from dealing in opium, and who basically started, or was one of the causes, one of the starters, one of the people behind the Opium War. Could you tell us about whether your family had much to do with the opium trade? Did that go as a legend in your family?
A quiet legend for many years, yes. My great-great-grandfather talked about it, wrote to his wife about it. They were both strongly opposed to slavery. And in one letter, he said, suppose that people could look at opium and what it does to the people who are addicted to it as another form of slavery. So he sort of tossed that remark off, but had some understanding of the difficult moral situation that that particular commodity put the New Englanders in.
We know that the rank ball, the ball on the top of the hat,
yes,
was given as a gift by Hao Qua directly to your ancestors. But how did you acquire the painting?
The painting, probably the same way. We've been looking into it was never a mystery, but we had to sort of recover the provenance of the painting. The painting was given to the museum at its outset by Mrs. William Youngman. Mrs. William Youngman was Elsie Forbes Perkins before she married Mr. William Youngman. And she was another direct descendant of Robert Bennett Forbes, the eldest in her generation. And so she had inherited both of these items. And when my father sort of pulled the family collection together, she was a very enthusiastic and active part of the leadership of doing that, and gave those two items and many other items to the museum that had come straight from Robert Bennett Forbes.
Let's talk a little bit about the painting itself. This work is attributed to Lam Qua, who was perhaps the most famous, or one of the most famous, of the China trade painters. These men taught themselves, actually by imitation or by studying with the master, oil painting, which was completely 180 degrees away from the Chinese tradition of ink and brush painting on scrolls. They provided these portraits for important people who were in China, working in China, and found most of their clientele in Canton itself. Now, it is said that Chinnery, the great painter who lived in Macau for many years, and I think he died in Hong Kong, who was the original painter of this kind of China Coast art for export, was the teacher of Lam Qua, but that has never been proven. We might say more accurately that Lam Qua was the imitator of Chinnery. I think that's what I've learned. The paintings are not extraordinary in any way. They're just standard portraits, realistic. And many paintings, do you know how many, Robert, were done of Hao Qua?
Dozens and dozens.
And he would have given them out to people he knew. He would have maybe perhaps hung one in his own mansion. But, and how many wives did he have? Do we know that?
I don't know that.
That would be interesting. The richest man in the world,
Yeah.
in a society where one is allowed to have many wives. Interesting thought. Anyway, one more thing on Lam Qua, the painter to whom this is attributed. His most famous work was painting medical anomalies. There is a series of about 100 paintings that he did of patients that came to the hospitals with Western doctor named Peter Parker. Does that name ring a bell? And they're horrible to look at. They're all online. I believe they're at Yale now. And they show people with skin diseases and bone diseases and elephantiasis, people very, very, very sad, very, and it was sort of the before and after, because all these people were treated and they weren't famous enough to have the picture taken or painted afterwards, but the painting before was there for all to see. And it's a remarkable, again, a meeting of East and West, using anatomical painting for scientific reason and for the sake of curing people, something we might consider needing today, actually. So let's move now to back to the button. I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, there were, beginning in the Ming Dynasty, the empire introduced a series of grades or ranks, 9 in number, for both the military and the civil service. The civil service rank was determined by one's performance on the imperial exam system. And those imperial exams took place once a year in the county level, and then once every 2 years in the provincial level, and then I believe once every 3 years in the imperial capital level in Beijing. And based on your performance, you would be given a rank and a title, and one of these 9 beads for your hat, and also a rank badge or a series of them, or basically gave you the right to wear such a rank badge and such a rank hat. Now, as you can imagine, in any system where you have a hierarchy of 9 or of any number, such as the Catholic Church or such as the American government, the Chinese government, there was all kinds of corruption. The people who were 3rd rank wanted to be 2nd rank, so they could buy the rank. There were ranks for sale, and therefore the beads were also for sale. But we know for sure that Hao Qua received his as an honor for his contribution to the Qing government. To me, collecting these is a bit like stamp collecting. You have 1 to 9. The rank badges are the same animal. There's an animal on every rank on the badge, birds and beasts, and they are like stamps. They were traded and exchanged, and you could make one yourself if you wanted to. They're made of cloth, they're embroidered, some of them are woven, some of them have peacock feathers in them. They can be very beautiful, but they can also be very simple, just like postage stamps. The giving away one's button, I'm trying to think what it might equal in us. It might be like a boy giving his girlfriend his high school ring, a badge of honor and a sign of accomplishment. Now, another question, Robert.
Yeah.
What do you think we today, with Chinese-American relations being what they are, we haven't quite gone to war yet, but it's been talked about. And the saber rattling is rather disturbing. And if we go back to the early 19th century, we have a country which was losing a dynasty which had been powerful when it began in 1644, but after 200 years out of its 300 years, it was beginning to weaken. There were uprisings, there was poverty, there were floods. After there was the Opium Wars, of course, and then a few years after this, we had the terrible Taiping Rebellion. And I looked up one interesting fact. The Taiping Rebellion, which was basically after Fuqua died, not Fuqua, Haokua died, took 20 million lives over the course of 12 years. Now, the population of the United States in 1860 was about 30 million souls. It just gives you an idea of where the two countries were at that time. Your pioneering great-grandfather and uncle were very young, yes, when they went to China?
They were.
They were Boston Brahmins, meaning they had the best possible education and background, but they were young pioneers, I would say. United States at that time was only, what?
Not even 50 years.
50 years old. It was a new country. There was no West to speak of in our country. What do you think? What did it mean? What was the experience? What was the experience that your great-grandfather and uncle had when they first went to China from their letters? Could you tell us what their reaction was?
Well, yes. First of all, indeed, they were very young, and they were also not particularly well educated, because their branch of the family, the Brahmin whole thing hadn't really clicked yet. Their branch of the family was not the least bit well off. Their father was not a good provider, and died when Robert Bennett Forbes was 21. At which point, Robert went to sea, or Ben as he was called, went to sea when he was 13. He was that's after having spent 3 years as an apprentice to his uncle, Thomas Handaside Perkins, his mother's brother, who sort of took them under his wing. And his brother, when their father died, had to leave school. He was much younger. He was about 11. He was getting a good education, but he was removed from that and went into the family business, so to speak. So they got, not only did they get most of their education in the mercantile business, and much of it in China, but Haokua was for them really a substitute father. He was a mentor to them, and and very paternal in his relations with them. And we have always, the family has always felt a tremendous debt of gratitude, a personal debt of gratitude to Hao Kwa. He's almost like a collateral ancestor for us. My father wrote about going to visit his grandfather, Robert Bennett Forbes' son, who also went to China, who had a big house in on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, and he would always ask my grandfather to open the doors to the Chinese parlor, and they would look at the many Chinese artifacts there, and my grandfather would generally be he would find him gazing at the portrait of Hao Kwa, who he called the old gentleman, and talked about, if it weren't for the old gentleman, we probably wouldn't be here. And in fact, that relationship was not unique with Hao Kwa. He took a lot of the American merchants under his wing, but I think it's fair to say that there was a special relationship with the two of them. He'd also really liked their older brother who died, and so you can see that there was no place in that relationship for any of the arrogance that the other European traders, particularly the British, showed to the Chinese. We were the junior partner in that relationship, and we knew it. And China was the first nation that opened up its trade with us. We'd been cut off from the trade with Britain after the Revolution and the West India trade, which was the linchpin of our economy. Sailed into China in 1784, and were welcomed and treated as equals. Except, of course, we were like all the other foreigners, relegated to the tiny little island of Shamin in the Pearl River. But that was the way of the Middle Kingdom. It was not interested in having foreign devils pollute its society. So it's been a it goes down now for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. This close filial relationship, really, with Hao Kwa, and similarly with Guangzhou, with Canton, and with China in general. When I was growing up, all of the artwork in my house in Cambridge was Chinese. We had paintings of junks, which I have over our staircase now, and we had paintings of Hao Kwa's garden and other such items, and port paintings of Canton. I think I probably was more familiar with, I know I was more familiar with Canton Harbor than I was with Boston Harbor. So it's in our, it's in our DNA, this connection to China, and many other families are in the same situation. The Roosevelts, the Delano family, President Roosevelt is another good example. But that's I think that's a real resource to draw on as our two nations work out some new kind of working relationship. We've got this past of deep respect to draw upon. So that's one of the things that makes me very proud of my background and connection to Hakwa.
It is truly amazing and wonderful. You're very lucky, I would say.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
It's in your DNA. We foreigners have to learn Chinese from scratch. What's interesting is you talked about the intimate relationship, the avuncular Haokua.
Yeah.
The fact that they got so close and they had to deal in pidgin English.
Yeah.
And is anybody using pidgin English anymore? I don't think so.
Remarkable.
But there are some letters from Haokua, right, that you have in pidgin English?
I'm not sure about that. I only know about the letters to Haokua. Most remarkable of these is when the Kohong, the merchant system, was essentially broken up in early 1840s. John Murray Forbes wrote to Haokua, if when the Kohong ceases, the mandarins continue to exact money from you, I do not see where it will end unless you will make up your mind to take possession of one of my ships, the Akbar or the Paul Jones, for the conveyance of yourself and family to come to this country, where every man is only called upon to pay his fair share of the expenses of the government. Possibly this climate may be too cold for you just here, Boston, but if so, you would find St. Augustine in Florida very much a climate as that of Canton, or you might resort to one of the West Indian islands. Unfortunately, the letter arrived in China after Haokua had died. But as you mentioned, J.M. Forbes did invest this huge sum that was essentially given to him with no strings of any kind attached by Haokua to invest in America. And that provided a jump start for the railroad industry. And really the first railroad in America was in Quincy, Mass, taking granite from the quarry there down the hill to the town, and I suspect that that might have been some of the inspiration for my great great grandfather to get involved in this. Great uncle to get involved in this business.
I read that it took 4 months for a letter to get back and forth, and how business. I'm trying to put myself in that period when young Americans who probably hadn't seen much of the world, ships out at age 13.
Yeah.
You know, but pre-puberty.
Yeah.
And goes to China, finds a good uncle.
Yeah.
And makes a life out of it. That's extraordinary.
It is. It's incredible.
They were really.
He was a captain at 19, by the way.
Of a ship. And these were some of the fastest ships in the world, right? The China Clippers.
Exactly right.
And there was also not only developing railroads, but in a sense, the development of fast and furious ocean shipping and the trade, quite amazing. What do we want to talk about now? Let's see. the, let me look at my notes for just a second. Ah, yeah. Another thing about Haokua was that his company was called Iwa, Iha in Mandarin, and that name is the name that was taken over by by Swire, which still uses that as a Chinese name today. And so from the Hong Kong point of view, it's sort of like I don't know how to explain it. It's like Campbell's soup. It's
Yeah.
so much a part of the culture
Yeah.
that goes back so many years. Let's see. Have you been to China recently?
Just this one time, about 6 years ago. And some people would say I haven't been to China because I've just been to Guangzhou. And they consider themselves to be almost a separate entity. I said, well, you know, I keep hearing about how oppressive China is, but I don't really feel it here. And they would say to me, we have an expression in Guangdong. The emperor is very great and very far away.
Right.
So that and I really did fall in love with that city. It's and the enthusiasm of the people in Guangzhou to meet Americans was completely different from anything I had expected. There was especially when they heard that we were connected with the China trade. They're very interested in that part of their past and frustrated because all of the best items, of course, were traded out. All the best items left the country. So there's a big market in Guangzhou among collectors to bring important pieces back. I do think that's probably the place where the redevelopment of good relations would begin. I went to a park in Guangzhou that is dedicated to the 70 martyrs of the Chinese Revolution. The first one with Sun Yat-sen. And at the very top of this long hill is a monument which had blocks contributed by all of the immigrant Chinese populations of cities around the world. And on the very top of that is a model of the Statue of Liberty, which apparently survived the Cultural Revolution. I would say that's the beginning of a framework to build upon.
Don, it's Nancy. I think now is the time to open to Q&A. We have a number of questions in the audience. I think first and foremost, there is some actually questions, Robert, around if there's any Chinese ancestry in your family. That was something that had come up a few times. And
if I take off my glasses, you'll have that question even.
Well,
even
yeah,
more
could you tell us a little bit about any of the Chinese ancestry or families, are you fifth generation? That was one question that had come up.
Well, I've always wondered about that and was able to, we have a pretty complete family tree for that branch of the family, and none of the females of the family ever spent any time in China. So that particular route is closed off. I also found out through Ancestry.com that I was talked into doing the DNA test that all of my ancestry is British Isles and Western Europe. It's literally nothing outside of that very, I would say, waspy background, except that most of them are Celts. So I've got a little bit of a, there's Scots and some Irish. So, but it's as white bread as you can get. There's no variety in there at all. So as far as I know, there is no, certainly within my own lineage, there is none. Whether there are families in China today descending from, I mean, we know that there are many Chinese who are descended from American and European merchants. And some of them have some of their descendants have come to the States for various reasons, investigate their lineage and other reasons, but doesn't seem to be any of that in my family, as far as we can tell.
And that's fascinating. And Ancestry.com is creating a lot of inroads into understanding of our own ancestry. Don, someone has shared such a wonderful fact here. There is another portrait, Commissioner Ling, Lin, I think the forest character, similar to the Ho Kwa, and it's at the Union Club at 9 Park Street in Boston. So there's probably a number of paintings now that we can probably sort of like, create a little portfolio of the works. And also there are Chinese gentlemen, Robert Bennett and John Murray Forbes were both among the founders of the Union Club.
Yes, yeah. In
So
1863, I believe.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Martha, for that, that information. Another question we had sent to us was the Forbes House Museum. It was originally called the Chinese American Trade Museum, and you changed the name, and just wondering what the thought process was on behalf of the family.
Well, here's what happened. When it was founded in 1965, it was a house museum. It was the Captain Robert Bennett Forbes house, and the Captain Robert Bennett Forbes Museum. At a certain point, the research that my father was doing in the field of Asian export art, which is really a field that he created as an academic discipline, outgrew the house museum model, and it was originally the first change was to the Museum of the American China Trade, MACT. And that was a little bit much to stumble over, so it became the China Trade Museum. And there is another, as you are probably all aware, there's another very important institution in Massachusetts that deals with the China trade and the Asian export world, which was then the Peabody Museum in Salem. And the philanthropists, the donors, sort of read the Riot Act to my father, and they said, we're not going to support 2 Asian export museums within 40 miles of each other, but if you can get the two to join together, they will be supported in a style to which you would want to become accustomed. And so the Peabody and the China Trade Museum engaged in negotiations, and in 1984, they merged together with Salem's Essex Institute to become the Peabody Essex Museum, PEM, which is, I think, the endowment of that museum rivals that of the Museum of Fine Arts. They can pretty much do whatever they want. So the funders were true to their word on that. At that point, my father felt was not expecting the museum in Milton to go on, but the people in Milton felt very strongly that they wanted to hold on to it, and they developed a board, and they essentially turned it back into a house museum, which now is quite a progressive and exciting institution that is dedicated to exploring the mercantile and entrepreneurial history of the United States and the social reforms through the lens of the Forbes family. And because my people never threw anything away, there's a lot of documentation, and you can actually tell a story that the other Boston Brahmins will have nothing to do with. They want to keep their privacy.
Fascinating.
To talk about opium?
That's for a whole nother conversation. Professor Forbes and Don, we have such a good question here, especially given Dr. Forbes, your expertise in the American slave trade. There's a wonderful question around the American slave trade and Chinese American trade in your work. But also as a reminder, this is really the same period of time when we're dealing with Chinese exclusion. The Transcontinental Railroad's just been built by predominantly Irish workers, and a large part of the dangerous period through the Sierra Nevada mountains by Chinese laborers. So this is all going on simultaneously. So I guess the question is, have you thought about those intersections between the slave trade and how you think about the Chinese laborers at that time, and especially the juxtaposition of your own family and their interactions with Hokwa? It just seems like three different worlds at play.
Yes, no, that is a very good question. The Americans, as well as the English, liked to tell themselves that once formal slavery was abolished, they'd solved the problem. Everybody got a wage, right? And in fact, the conditions for Chinese indentured laborers were in many cases unquestionably worse than the conditions, at least for enslaved Africans in what is now the United States. It was perhaps as bad as in the sugar plantations of the West Indies and Brazil. But for example, the first American imperialism was taking over these islands in the Pacific that had miles of guano, of seagull droppings on them, because they discovered this could be used for fertilizer, and they shipped the Chinese laborers to these guano islands, and their life expectancy when they got there was really months and not years. It was such toxic work that they were working in. So this is absolutely a key issue, and one that we have not fully come to terms with at this point. We're getting the exposure to it more clearly than at any recent time, with the conditions for essential workers in the time of COVID-19. And they may be essential, but they're not being paid a living wage, and they're being exposed to conditions that are guaranteed to give them a tremendous mortality rate. So it remains a tremendously relevant question.
I have one more question just to bring up. The money that your ancestors accepted and invested for the railroads from Haokua, is it possible that some of that money actually went to hiring Chinese slave labor in this country to build the railroads?
That's a great question.
How far did the Chinese laborers come east? We know that they started on the west end. Do we know how far did they come, as far as Chicago?
I don't think so.
Some of these lines crossed.
Yes, 1,700 miles of laid track.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, and this would have been earlier than the great push for crossing the continent, but it certainly created the infrastructure, helped to create the infrastructure that created this exploitation. It is significant that New England had no truck with the Chinese exclusion law. They were it did not have a constituency here, and they thought it was boorish and the idea that people from the oldest civilization in the world would be excluded by young American whippersnappers was laughable to the families of the China trade.
This conversation could certainly go on for a number of hours. And there's another comment here that the Forbes family may have been involved in the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad. That would be an interesting thing for a sequel to this program, which we cannot thank Cohn. Wasn't that just fabulous? Just thank you for the research, Don, and for putting it in context. And thank you to Robert Pierce Forbes and the Forbes House Museum for sharing your wonderful, I'm sorry, I want to show you the last slide here, but let me not. Just to thank you for just being a part of our inaugural series here. And please visit the Forbes House and here's some information about them. We can bring it up really quickly, but forbeshouse.org. Heidi, thank you so much for just partnering with us in this. Special thanks to all of you there for sharing your collection, for being a collector, and encourage everyone on the call, all 105 of you, think about your artifacts. Let us be a resource. We have our digital archives online on the website. It's a little bit buried right now, but look out for November when we'll have an enhanced website and you'll be able to access our archives and our collections digitally on that website. And also special thanks to Don. Don, we could listen to you all day, just tell about the context in which, maybe you should do another section on Peter Parker and his paintings, which great. I think would be fascinating.
It is fascinating story.
And the whole missionary movement. We'll get someone from Yale School of Medicine to do that. And look forward to the next episode of MOCA Treasures on the Road. And lastly, but so importantly, thank you to everyone out there who supported us in our very dire time of need after that 5-alarm fire. We hope that we can continue being the museum that has a collections and one that's in-house. and that we will continue to grow it once we get past this pandemic period. The idea of the roadshow was that we wanted to go out into the country and help people preserve and collect their items and keep them in a safe place for more stories that are untold. So Don, Robert, Forbes House Museum, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Look forward to seeing you in October.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. That
Bye,
was
everyone.
great.
Have a
Thank
safe,
you.
good night.